It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Irwin.
Esperanza, I was thinking for today, rather than doing our little preamble, being as it is high season here and everyone's got some time constraints, I think we're going to get right into it and bring in a very special guest, really a guy well known on the East End of Long Island. He does a lot of, I almost want to call what he does public service. He moderates a lot of programs and puts a lot of really great stuff out there. So without further ado, that was a dramatic pause. Let's welcome in Biddle Duke. Biddle, good morning.
Good morning, Esperanza and Irwin. It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, we're really excited. And Esperanza, the meat of this story is the extraordinary story of Boys Harbor. And Biddle is going to tell us really about his uncle, Tony, Anthony Duke, who we throw this word around a lot on Our Hamptons podcast, Esperanza, calling people a visionary. But Anthony Duke was really a visionary. And we're going to get into that whole story with Biddle, but just for
And,
those
and may I say, Irwin, because you said something very important about Biddle, which is it's like you are doing a public service. Well, I think it runs in the family.
Well, I get carried away here. I'm just following, I guess I would call it following my heart and my instincts. But and it's funny you use the word visionary, Irwin. I don't think my uncle actually was looking into the future at all. He was just working in his moment and this moment that he had on in his life. He wasn't thinking. Yes, he was to a certain extent thinking about the future, but mostly he was just trying to help the world right around him right then in his life.
Responding to his instincts.
Yeah, that sounds very accurate to me. And I mean, it almost is even a bigger feather in his cap because it wasn't necessarily his intent for what ultimately developed, which is just something extraordinary and really a story that merits being told to our community because it's just an important one. But Biddle, your connection to the East End of Long Island, and Biddle sent us really some great information about himself, and in addition to his Uncle Tony, really started in the 19th century. The background of your family with the original Southampton summer colony, Esperanza, we did a podcast about that, if you recall, talking about that. Dr. Theodore Galliard Thomas, I think, was the person who often given credit with it. But tell us a little bit about it, about your upbringing and your time out here.
Yeah, fifth generation Southampton kid. Even though I'm 62, I'm still a kid. Yeah, our family began as summer people here. My great grandfather bought a chunk of land at the south end of Main Street on South Main Street and designed and built a house there that's actually quite famous. It's well known. It's called Wyndecote. It's no longer in my family. And and he also was actually the architect. And summer people back then, I mean, even now, of course, summer people are deeply engaged in the community. But I think my people always felt like Southampton was home, even though they only spent 3-4 months in Southampton. My great grandfather was, for example, the architect for the Rogers Memorial, the Rogers Library on Job's Lane, and I think he had a hand in working on the actual construction project too. The sort of roots are quite deep there. And Wyndecote it's one of those known houses. It's hidden by hedges now, so you can't see it, but it used to be open to the street in that classic way. I grew up there. My father was a diplomat, and I was born in DC, but then the first 18 years of my life, I was abroad following my father around on his diplomatic career, living in many countries in Europe and in Morocco. And I would come and spend, as a little boy, a couple of months every summer with my grandmother at Wyndecote. This property was unbelievable. I mean, literally, literally and metaphorically from another era. I mean, a beautiful big house with a incredible porte cochere. a barn where they had horse carriages and a chauffeur's quote unquote cottage. And we slept in the barn. My
You know,
mother.
and us, I have to interject because Biddle, I know, listens to our Hamptons podcast, and we always discuss on our Hamptons how we like to transport our audience, Esperanza, to a time and place. But Biddle, and I read this a few times when you sent it to us, the way you slept in that barn with the fragrance of the dry grass and the hay. And that our audience loves, well, Esperanza, I'm so selfish. It's really me that loves it. I'm hoping our audience does too. But elaborate on that for us. Just the whole vibe of Southampton at the time and that whole atmosphere of this. Oh, love that
Well,
story.
my first memories when we first started living in this place in the summertime, there were still horse carriages in downstairs, and upstairs you could still see the tack for the horses and the bridle stuff and all that. And there was a kitchen on the second floor, because the rooms that we stayed in were originally for the help for the big house. They're little rooms with single beds, and but you could smell the. My mom used to complain about it, but you could smell the horse smell, I would call
The
it.
animals, the four-legged animals.
Of course, for me, it was just magic, like, magic place, incredible, and no fanciness here. I mean, our driveway was sand to Gin Lane, and you could. It was a different. I mean, I could play soccer on South Main Street in the late '60s and early '70s. I mean, it was a quiet community. It was a different kind of place for sure.
Esperanza, there was no screening. Now it's all hedged in. You can see nothing. But Biddle, when you were there,
It was a
Esperanza and I,
neighborhood.
right?
Yeah, I could ride my bike from one neighbor across the lawn to the next person, and we all knew each
No
other.
fences, right? No fences, no
Yeah,
gates.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, I think one of the things that I just wanted to mention was just for me personally, because of my odd upbringing, we would return to the United States and go to Southampton. We had no other place. My father he didn't own property in the United States. So that those summer months for me as a kid right into my teen years, that's how I knew America, as absurd as that is. My knowledge and understanding of my country was to go visit my grandmother in Southampton. It always has been home. Tangentially, I'm a surfer. I started surfing as a little kid thanks to my father, who was a big waterman, and surfing back then was a local kids sport, not a fancy thing, and not a it was accessible to local kids. So all my friends are the local kids, and the children of merchants and firemen, and in Southampton, the Krasinskis and the Barukis and the Tereskis. And so I sort of straddled the world there. My family clearly was summer colony, and we were members of all those fancy clubs, but I hung out with Amy Brown, Dr. Sherrod Brown's daughter, and that was my tribe, sort of the local community. So when I got out of college, you were asking me about my bio, Irwin. When I got out of college and I was unable to get a job working for newspapers in New York, which is what I really wanted to do, or Washington, D.C., I retreated to Southampton, and the editor of the Southampton Press, Peter Booty, hired me as a reporter, and that was 1986. And that's when I became a journalist. That was the beginning of my life as a journalist.
We always talk about this because I think, Biddle, I grew up similarly. I mean, I wasn't the summer kid, but my experience was very similar to that. We always talk about that, and the distinction you made earlier as well about the summer colony people really being enmeshed in their community, which is something, not to say, as you indicated, that no one is like that today as a second homeowner, but there was just a different, I don't feel like you have the same investment in the community now. It's like you need the flashiness nowadays. And back then it was, you'd be a volunteer fireman. You'd be a part of that realm of the local community that really made you on par with any other local people. And they appreciated that. We all saw that as people coming into this community.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess when I think back at my great grandfather helping, basically designing and building the library, that was, I'm sure, I don't know this, but I'm sure he and they also contributed a tremendous amount of money to do that. And, building a library Yeah, that's a good thing for everyone, but it's also very sort of community minded. It's very sort of intrinsic it's a foundational element of a place. And
Yeah, well, it's part of a progressive era as well of doing those kinds of things, of like a civic duty to create to better your community, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Esperanza, you know what? When Biddle was telling the story a little bit, while it's obviously not a complete parallel, but there were some parallels. It brought me back to the interview we did with Mike Solomon in
Mhm.
Georgia, if you recall. And he was the son of a well-known artist, and just the way that whole community was and the entrenchment within, to your point, in sort of a very different way than one gets entrenched in a community today.
I was just going to interject there because Mike is a friend, and I remember surfing was a big sort of cross pollinator for me when I was old enough to sort of venture to Georgia. I think I was probably 15 or 16, and I discovered, quote unquote, Mike
Right.
and
Mahoneyville.
and Mahoneyville. I was like, oh, my people.
Right.
And let me tell you, Irwin and Esperanza, the Mahonies had a real honest to God barn, like 500 yards from what is now the Georgia parking lot. And it was, I mean, obviously it was another completely different time, but it was so cool.
I
And
I
people would come off the beach and just follow us over there and chat and sit and I know that era. I remember that world that Mike was a part of, Mahoneyville and the McGiverns, and just yeah, that was a beautiful time. Very uh, yeah, very much more relaxed in a way, but
Yes. Yeah,
it's
much less structured in so many ways, I think also.
yeah, yeah.
Esperanza, I find myself, and this has happened so often on our Hamptons podcast. Esperanza has seen me do this. I'm I'm sort of almost tuning out and daydreaming about Mahoneyville right now, right? I mean, like
Yeah,
that
yeah, for
whole
sure. For
that
sure.
that whole
Yeah, it's like we didn't live it, but we can relate to it and understand that and become nostalgic about it, even though it had nothing to do with
co-
our lives. But
completely true, and in a crazy way. I mean, this is really going to sound crazy, Biddle, but I have to say it because I think it's what Esperanza is trying to get at as well. It's like I missed something that I had no idea was even there, but the way Mike relayed the story when we spoke to him about that, and that just hearing it from Biddle is just wow, of a time and place.
Irwin, you asked me some years ago to tell the story of my wife's family house on the beach at Wyndecote, which was that era, and we many family members owned it jointly, and it was sold several years ago. And I don't really want to talk about that house. It's theirs to talk about, but I will say we did something that I just want to mention because it fits really well into this conversation, and that is after we had a signed contract and the house was for sale. And by the way, just to describe the house, behind the dune at Georgia, like 150 yards from the first jetty, unair conditioned, wooden windows, most of them that didn't close properly, um, classic Formica kitchen, just a Garland stove. 6 family units shared it, and we all got along amazingly. There was collective food gathering and food and dinner making and food. Anyway, so when we signed the contract, we had a huge open house with artists filling every room. We had emptied the house, and my daughter organized a weekend of art events, music, artists in the house. She put up art all around the house, and then we put a sign up on the dune, you know, open house, come over the dune, and people were coming over, going, wow, am I really allowed here? I mean, this is a neighborhood that has gates everywhere and security lights, and people were kind of blown away. And there was, not a loud band, but there was music. There was free food too. I mean, I've been charged a little bit for the food, but anyway, that was in the spirit of what this place was in the 70s and even into the 80s.
yeah.
Very open. And when I talk about Mahoneyville, people would meet, Mike or any one of the Mahonies and on the beach, and they'd say, "Hey, come over to our house. We're playing some music tonight." Like, what? I mean, of course, back then it was much more natural. It's just like, anyway, just a little anecdote about that Georgia house, which is so fitting for this conversation.
It is, and it makes me think, to coming back to what also we're going to talk about. I'm thinking in my head that this must have been in part your whole family's experience through the generations of being out here, and that informed your uncle in his mission to create something for inner city youth. I mean, I don't think that's a stretch to think that what you're describing, which is so wonderful and healthy, and it gives a freedom to a person to imagine more creative futures, is something that he wanted to offer.
Absolutely. I mean, to talk about Tony a little bit, right? So Tony grew up in a generation that believed. So he was a very privileged, as am I. He grew up very privileged, um, a member of the absolute elite. But he grew up in an era, and I would hope to believe that that still exists today. All of the tremendous financial success that exists today. But he grew up in an era that if you were born into into a world where you had silver spoons sticking out of every orifice, you had to share those spoons. You had to spend some portion of your life not giving away your money, but giving away your time, giving away your love, giving away your bounty, which is more than money. He went
Exactly. I think that's a key distinction, though, it's not just money and plastering your name on a building. It's doing.
when I meet people, and we'll get into the story of Boys Harbor, I hope. Let's see, what are we here? 9:20. Yeah. When I meet people, graduates isn't the right word, but who moved through Boys Harbor, or what eventually became something called the Harbor, New York State judges, successful business people, I'll encounter them. Oh, Duke, you're in relation to Tony Duke? You know what? He was the first person who really saw me.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, what a
That
legacy.
is, we really do need to get into this story. So, Esperanza, we have to thank Biddle for segueing us, because we really do want to talk about that. And just from the little research I uncovered just before we were talking to you, this literally started with uh, Uncle Tony pitching tents on his mother's lawn. I mean, in Southampton. Am I correct? Literally.
Yeah, the same house that we were talking about with
Right.
the
Right.
barn and the carriages.
So as I explained about giving back, he went to a school in New Hampshire called St. Paul's School, and the school has this organization called the Missionary Society, which is a very strange name for the organization. But the Missionary Society ran a summer camp for Manchester, New Hampshire, Nashua, New Hampshire mill worker kids, because they had nothing to do in the summer. So the school basically used its campus and other spaces to offer summer camp opportunities for these kids. And students at St. Paul's schools, juniors and seniors, would basically they weren't forced to do this, but they would volunteer to be camp counselors at this camp. And that's how Tony got the idea. And then when that ran out after his senior year at St. Paul's, the next year he got some of the kids that were part of that program, some of the campers, to be his first campers. And he didn't have any great idea. He was like, well, why don't we go out to Southampton and basically stay at my mother's house? And they pitched tents on the property and stayed in the pool house, and that was the beginning of it. And then he raised money through wealthy friends, and he did something in Connecticut while he was in college. He went to Princeton, and he kept going. He called it different things. It became the Harbor when it was on 3 Mile Harbor, but before 3 Mile Harbor, it was in Connecticut. And yeah, I mean, that's how it began. And then Tony, I'd love to just tell a little bit about the beginning of his life story, because it's so telling.
We do want to hear that, but I have to just, one thing I have to interject. He literally started this Esperanza at 19 years
19.
old.
Yeah, like
That's
Biddle said, he just graduated.
unbelievable. I'm sorry to steal your thunder, but I really wanted to make sure our audience knew this. This was a 19-year-old Anthony Duke that really conceptualized this entire thing at this age. But please, yes. Continue.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to
Tell us
steal your
more
thunder.
about this Anthony Duke. Yeah.
And the wonderful thing is he showed up. I don't think I reread the section of his book, Uncharted Course, the other day, just to remind myself about what you asked, I think, in one of our email exchanges, or when what did his mother say? Or maybe someone asked.
That's what I was wondering.
And his mother said, "Oh, I know just the man you should call for money and for land." So she did probably didn't want them on her property forever, but also I think she was thinking, how can we grow this thing? Wow, my son
She
is on.
saw the benefits.
Yeah, my son's onto something really awesome, and I admire him and love him, and let's see if we can make this thing flourish. His Princeton education was cut short by the war, and he went to the Naval Academy. He joined the Navy, and became a naval captain, and was put in charge of a landing craft. They were called LSTs, and then crossed the Atlantic to begin the planning for D-Day. And on D-Day, he was captain of his own LST, the 530 or 540. And by the way, one of those LSTs is goes back and forth between New London and Orient Point. Not Tony's, I don't think. But anyway, and he was also commander of 10 other LSTs. And I think if memory serves, on D-Day, he went back and forth across the channel 35 times, landing men, landing troops, landing armaments, pulling up onto the beach. And you can imagine what he saw. In addition to dealing, and it's interesting, in his book, in addition to dealing with, we're talking, 1942, to dealing with tensions around race on all his boats. Like he had young black men under his charge and white men who didn't want to work alongside black men. He had to deal with all kinds of stuff. And that also informed what he would do later around the harbor, because racism he was powerfully driven to give young black men and Hispanic men an opportunity in life, because he knew, he could see, he could feel, he had lived, he had experienced the challenges that they faced as young Americans. He saw that in the war. After D-Day, he stayed in the European theater for a while, and then he was sent over to the Pacific. But then he returned to the United States. I think I said to you in one of my emails, he returned to the United States and was looking around for, where am I going to find campers? And he went to the Big Brother organization. He went to a bunch of organizations, but he literally went to New York and said, I'm here. I'm looking for young people who want to get the hell out of the city, who have no options for the summer. And I'm willing to take him to I want to take him to Southampton. And, at the same time, he was looking for the proper site. And he, through a friend, flew over the South Fork looking at Jessup's Neck, and he looked at a bunch of places. And for a while, he actually ran the camp on Jessup's Neck. Some guy owned almost all of it, and then now it's a county park, I think. But he flew over 3 Mile Harbor and ended up buying, I think, close to like 300 acres on the south side of 3 Mile Harbor, and that's where he began the camp.
And that was in 1954. That was the permit when he bought the permanent camp. So again, it needs to be pointed out, he was at this point only 36 years old, doing this kind of work, Esperanza. Listening to this, and this often happens on our Hamptons podcast when we have a guest, one of my takeaways here is how Biddle is describing how, yes, this was a person grew up in a privileged background, silver spoons, the whole bit, and I don't want to get into a whole commentary of what we're seeing today, but this is somebody that really did something, saw something, knew he had these advantages, so to speak, but went and did something for the greater good at a very young age that has influenced so many people. It's just an extraordinary story, and a local story, Biddle, as well.
Oh, completely enmeshed with the local, and Southampton, and obviously East Hampton, as he ended up in East Hampton. I mean, I grew up going to the Boys Harbor fireworks.
Right.
Yeah, those were fun. Those were really, really fun parties. And Irwin, he had to raise, it's a little bit of a family story, but he had to raise money. He couldn't do it on his own financially. So when he bought that land with a developer called Paul Bianco, who's sort of well known in the 3 Mile Harbor, Sammy's Beach area, because he and Tony owned a lot of land, and they ended up sort of subdividing a bunch. And a lot of that early sort of the development work with Paul on this land purchase helped fund the launch and the growth of the harbor. There's a Duke Drive, and
Right.
there's also a Barclay Court across the street named after his son Barclay. So Tony needed to raise funds, and at the same time, by the way, he was trying to have a career in business. And
I was just going to ask you that, like, what was his quote unquote day job?
His main career was development, oddly enough, in Florida. With investors, bought land in Florida, tremendous amounts of land in Florida, and developed relatively low cost housing, in suburban areas of Florida. And he lived down there for much of the year in those early years, and then he would come north to run the camp and be on 3 Mile Harbor in the summers. He learned pretty quickly, I would say, I don't know when the New York City operation began, but he learned pretty quickly that a summer camp is insufficient.
Mm.
And by that, I mean, it was a great boon for young inner city kids who have nothing to do in the summer. There were very few summer programs for anything.
I wonder if, I don't know which came first. I wonder if Tony really inspired the whole Fresh Air Fund, which is similar kind of mission, or they sort of paralleled each other. But Tony invested in youth when they were very impressionable to really help mold them into model citizens, and just your reflections of meeting some of these people. Oh yeah, I went to and I was part of. You can't minimize that legacy. That is
Yeah,
just such a difference maker in terms of someone's life,
for sure.
multiple lives.
I think there was a lot of things going on there, Irwin. Just to get out of the city and go to this big piece of undeveloped land where this white guy was super friendly and super awesome. And many of these kids arrived frightened. They didn't trust people. Certainly didn't trust. These were mostly kids of color. They didn't trust white people. And there was this guy who saw them fully. And the stories that he told of his interactions with the kids, with many of the kids are just so beautiful. Kids who would try and run away from camp.
Mm.
And he would say, "Come down to the house. Come down to the house. Come and have a drink with me. Let's eat drink some punch, and tell me about your life."
You
you
know,
know, tell this guy. He wasn't tall or big. Tony was not a big man. He was probably 5'10", and he was a little man, but no, not little, but not
It's
not
slight.
not big stature. But still, he was huge, right? And he was Mr. Duke at the harbor. And these kids, he turned around and emboldened so many lives. I can't tell you. He gave kids real hope.
Hope. Yeah.
Real hope. And now, I want to explain that, as I was trying to explain, the summer camp thing was great, but he realized pretty quickly, I mean, within 10 years or so, he was struggling on the one hand to balance this in his life, but he realized, oh boy, what inner city kids in New York really need is something from 2 p.m. when they get out of school and they go home and their parents aren't home for whatever reasons.
Right. The latchkey kids. Yeah.
Yeah, they need after school programs. I mean, for arts, for enrichment, to get ahead, for whatever. A big component of the harbor had always been the arts and the use of imagination, which young people are not necessarily cultivated, certainly in the public schools, as much as perhaps they should be or could be. And so it began, that's when it started in New York City. I forget, I think it was in the 60s. He went to Mayor Wagner, one of the mayors, and said, "Hey, I need space." And he was given almost an entire city block in Harlem. least, obviously not given, but and he had to raise money from friends, and he started the program in New York, and that really became that became the harbor. That became just the nucleus for the organization, and East Hampton was a gem, but was a satellite became over the years a satellite operation.
To give our audience, just in Tony's own words, there were a couple of quotes he made, how dedicating his life to this mission, it was to empower the lives of inner city young people, helping them overcome adversity as they achieve their creative, intellectual, and economic dreams. And how about this? You want to talk about something
Oh yeah,
probably as timely as you could ever be,
couldn't be more
discussing it
timely.
right now. My feeling is that if we're going to preserve our democracy, we can't have so many people falling through the cracks. We've got to give them their desserts, which is not just respect, it's a good education.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to editorialize, but this is who he was. And it's a legacy that really continues. And we should really say, even, we're going to start to wrap this up, but now he passed away in 2014, but in 2011, I believe, Biddle, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's when basically the property was sold. And I actually read this in the East Hampton Star going back that, okay, yes, they sold the land for a sum, but it was a bargain considering what that land was worth. But Tony wanted it preserved again for the greater good and wanted it to be ultimately public space.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Right.
correct.
You
Yep.
know,
I think Tony could have held on and made boatloads of money on all that land. And also he could have gotten more out of government, but he was a wonderful softy. He didn't want to squeeze too much from the people, from we the people. He wanted to get a good deal for everyone. We'll preserve this for everyone, and I'm not going to actually ask you to pay what it would be valued for full development. Just give me enough money. I mean, the land was, just to make this clear, the land, that incredible piece of land, which is bordered on the west side by Hans Creek, south side by 3 Mile Harbor, and the north side by Springy Banks Road, is a beautiful piece of property, an incredible rolling. There's springs there. I went back there a month or two ago and took a shovel and a cup and dug a little hole in the ground on Springy Banks on Hans Creek and took a drink of water right from the ground. I mean, it's beautiful, beautiful land. He could have actually extracted more money, and it was in essence, you guys, it was worth more for the operation in New York than it was worth holding on to as a camp. So that's why ultimately he sold it, because the operation in New York needed funds, and it's carrying on actually better than ever. It's the biggest social service agency in the South Bronx and in East Harlem, that exists today. It's called Scan Harbor now. But yeah, he sold basically. It was the end of his life, and I
right.
think he was wrapping things up. But also, I think he believed that money it was worth more as money for the operation in New York.
Yeah. And really, and it should be told, there are trails running through this property. The town and the county in a partnership made a paved trail. I mean, it's a beautiful public space. And that's where Biddle and I actually met when I'm on the Nature Preserve Committee for the town. I went to the dedication ceremony, which was very moving, seeing Biddle and his entire family there. It was a special moment, and it allows his legacy, Esperanza, really to live on, right?
Irwin, thanks for reminding me of that moment, because that ground for us, for our family, particularly for Tony's family, but for all of us, is sacred ground, and that it's that people are going and skating and walking and running and biking through that property that sang, and still today, to this day, sings with joy, sings with life, and it's that makes me, and I know all of his family, so happy.
East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, I'm the president of that organization, has done events and walks there frequently. So we are sharing it with the public. And yeah, Tony's smiling,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
How
Tony's.
could he not? You say he wasn't a visionary in a sense that we perhaps our formulation of it, but what could be more visionary than having left this gift to the community? I mean, it is, even it was a purchase, yes, but it was something, like you said, he wasn't extracting. He could have done lots of other things. And it was like everybody won in the end.
Esperanza, you want to take that William Pickens quote that we use all the time, right? And reversing it. For Tony Duke, it was all community, not commodity.
All of it.
Almost could burst into tears. I'm so glad that you mentioned his name. He was a beautiful, beautiful friend of Tony's, and a great, great friend of our families, and a huge supporter of the harbor, and obviously pillar in Sag Harbor. What a great guy.
Why is it not surprising that they were friends, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
very fitting.
And Biddle, we're going to wrap up because I practically have tears in my eyes talking about this, Esperanza. I'm such a softie. And yes, I could be Biddle's older brother, so I could say that. But it's William Pickens' words. And this was a guy that he got it and saw what was happening. But the love of community, the sensing of the importance of this community, that was, I guess, the common ground between Mr. Pickens and Mr. Duke, and just the connection to this place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's amazing how Tony's legacy has had multiple lives with that property. Well, I'm sort of spent. I have nothing else I could add. If you have a final thought, let's do it.
I wanted to just add
Please,
in your
Esperanza.
final thoughts, if you would, Biddle, tell us what you're up to. You carry on this legacy in some ways. I said it. You may be humble about it, but please tell us what you're doing.
I work for this organization, or I volunteer for this organization called Change Hampton, which is really focused on sustainable land care. So I work with Change Hampton as much as I can to organize events and panels to make awareness of how important it is to treat our lands as we would treat our own bodies, basically. I'm also on the East Hampton Sustainability Committee, which is driven to basically work to make East Hampton as sustainable and resilient as possible. I write a column for the 27 East Express News Group newspapers, which is actually really, really, really fun. I also write for a variety of other magazines and newspapers, including the New York Times and the Surface Journal. And I show up as much as possible for the things in the community that I really care about. That's really what my life is right now. People ask in America, what do you do? And my response these days is, I'm trying to lift people up. Right. But I'll tell you one little thing to connect back to Tony. So, I've had and I continue to have a journalist's life. I worked for newspapers all over the place. And I had my own newspaper company in Vermont for a number of years. But my wife and I moved back here she's an East Hampton girl, and her mom was near the end of her life some years ago, 5-6 years ago. And we moved back here to be with her and ended up deciding that this is home and this is where we want to be. We had lived in Vermont for 20 years before that. And as I move around this community, one of my greatest calling cards, people ask me, "Oh, Duke, are you any relation to Tony Duke?" It's like it is an absolute door opener. I mean, his legacy of what he did at the harbor, but also just being a great guy, just a beloved figure. We all want, to a certain extent, have belonger credentials, have local credentials. And let me tell you, to be Tony's nephew is like the greatest passkey ever.
Oh my gosh. Biddle Duke.
Great.
Really, thank you so much, Biddle, for making the time and speaking with us. Esperanza, without a question, this episode podcast will really resonate with our audience. So, Biddle, thank you so much. Esperanza, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Biddle. Until next time, Irwin.
Until next time. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.